Welcome to the Bladtcast. Excited to be here with our guest. Joining me now is Devin Gordon, who has written the most aptly titled Mets book I've ever read, and I've read quite a few. So Many Ways to Lose, the amazing true story of the New York Mets, the best, worst team in sports. Find the lie in that title. I can't. Devin, welcome to the show. Thanks for taking the time to chat with me.
Thank you for having me on. It's great to talk to Mets fans. I love it.
Yeah. While he was spending 16 years hosting a show at 12:30 in the morning, Conan O'Brien always explained how whenever people gave him a compliment, people always had to explain why they were up so late and why they saw his show. And I always feel like being a Mets fan, it's sort of the same way. It's like you people want to know, how did this happen? Why did you do this to yourself? Why didn't you choose the easy road of being a Yankees fan? So I'll start there, Devin. How and why did you do this to yourself?
Well, there's two questions you're asking in one, right? There's the why did I do this to myself as in becoming a Mets fan to begin with, right? Which is the original sin here. And then there is the compounding sin of writing a book, which is a crazy thing to do in the first place and something I'd actively avoided for most of my writing career about the history of the Mets, which would mean, literally going through like the toy chest of all of my childhood horror toys and bringing it all back out again. And, I think part of it is because I love my team and I felt like something needed to be said about why we love teams, why we watch sports, what we enjoy about them in the minute, that isn't winning. Because we never win, or at least we so rarely win that it becomes the grand exception that proves the rule. I feel like you have to win a little bit, a tiny bit, get that like smell of it in your nostrils in order to understand truly what it's like to lose the way we do. And that's special about the Mets. Like, I feel like a lot of teams lose with no charm, no distinction, no flavor. Like your Detroit Lions, right? Your Seattle Mariners, these teams that are just kind of ordinary. And the Mets are special in the way we lose, because we lose, in Game 7 of the 2006 NLCS because our best hitter watches 3 strikes go past him. We lose in an NLCS because of a walk-off walk. We lose even when we're winning, right? Yeah. And that's a very unique phenomenon, right? Like lots of teams have heartbreaking playoff defeats, but they're not like ours. You know what I mean? And so things like that, it just felt like there was something special about our team that had not been identified. And I wanted to make a defense of almost like the Conan O'Brien thing is a perfect example, because to me, it's almost like I'm answering my own question, right? Yeah. Why? Well, because of this, because this is special. This team, these stories, no one else has this stuff. This is awesome.
Yeah. And you and I are, if not exactly, we're very close to the same age. So I was 10 in 1986. My brother is 5 years older than me. So he's a Yankees fan because, he was collecting baseball cards in the late 70s. So that was a dynamite
team, sure.
Yeah, that was that was kind of the line of demarcation. But, we remember it was unheard of for somebody. So you wouldn't certainly take up the Yankees in the mid 80s. It's just, I didn't know anybody, it was all the kids in my school.
Not if you had them unless you had them thrust upon you.
Exactly.
Right. If you inherited them, I suppose that's acceptable, although shame on your family. If you lived in the Bronx, obviously, you're going to root for the team that's in your backyard. I have no qualms with them. But in the mid 80s, I'm sure you felt the same way, particularly in the early 80s. If you had a choice, if you were coming to this clean, why would you pick the Yankees? Like, there was everything to a little kid in the 80s. If you were just looking at them as a blank slate, would obviously go to the Mets. The colors were more fun. The team just had more spirit around them. They were on the upswing. The Yankees were all yelling at each other and angry, and the boss was the boss, and you couldn't have the hair and the mustache, and nobody was allowed to have fun, and it looked like their uniforms, they looked like they were in prison. And the Mets had a player named Strawberry, right? Yeah. And the Mets, you're 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old. if you have a choice between the prison uniforms and the orange and blue team with the strawberry guy on it, you're going to take the team with the strawberry guy on it. And that's what it was for me. It sounds like that's what it was for you. But if you were your brother's age, 5 years older, it's the reverse, right? You've got Thurman Munson and Reggie Jackson and all these colorful characters, and the Yankees are winning everything. And the Mets are the worst team literally on the planet in all of sports, right? They're just a disaster.
Yeah,
so,
no, my brother didn't care how tight Lee Mazzilli's pants were. Like that wasn't going to win him over. Yeah.
Yeah. And like if you're a boy at age 8, 9, or 10, the things that were appealing to those particular Mets, and there were not a lot of things that were very appealing, certainly weren't appealing to a 10-year-old boy who wanted to win some baseball games. Those Mets are now the version of the Mets that in some ways I'm the most curious about, that I if I had this book to do over again, I would go even deeper into, because I feel like that era of the Mets, the post-Seaver, juggernaut Mets, was actually kind of a really fun moment.
Sure. And the aptly named William Metz with a Z, he just chimes in on Facebook that Steinbrenner was scary.
It was scary. I agree.
And a criminal, so let's not forget that.
A criminal, a jerk. There really was this darkness around. There was a mean cravenness. This was a team that had, if you think about them in the context of what we know about dynasties and how they work, right? That Yankee team was in the post-dynastic crumbling phase where they're trying to bring in big stars, not homegrown stars, big stars from other teams to keep the thing moving, right? And some of them are working and some of them aren't. And Dave Winfield is really not working with the boss, right?
Exactly.
And so, the sort of the emotional tenor of that team in ways that, we're not going to appreciate as 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, was all negative. Even though, that team, I think they were a second or third place team. They were terrible, right? I think they were probably, if we look back, they were probably mid to high 80 wins. Am I right about that?
And just like the Mets in the later part of the 80s, the mid to late 80s, if we had the more recent playoff structure, those Yankee teams would have been in the playoffs. They would have, qualified for a wild card at least, So
and as you probably know about the Mets team, I mean, this is something that actually I discovered in the course of researching this. Like I knew, and I think most Mets fans know from that era, that if we were under the current playoff setup, with all the teams in, those Mets teams from 85 to 90 would have made the playoffs every year, which I think is something that most Mets fans either know or probably would have guessed. What I didn't realize is that it's even more bad luck, which is you don't even have to expand the playoff field. All you have to do is rearrange the league so that the alignment, the divisions are arranged the way they are now. And the Mets would have won the NL East every season. Which that really surprised me, because that there's like an 8 or 9 win team in there, like 80. That team would have won the NL East if it was arranged the way the divisions are now, because they would have won it with like 89 games. And so you do realize that some of this is bad luck, but at the same time, that Mets team went off the rails so much faster, I guess I'd say, than those Yankees teams did. Like, they still stretched it out a little longer than we did.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, and you reference in the book, just it's well documented, the demons that both Darryl and Doc had, and you talk about the Judd Apatow film he did where he talked to both of them. I watched that with my best friend, and I'm like, are we sure that Doc is still alive today? Just because of what he looked like in that, and I hope he's that's more than 5 years ago now, and he is still with us. So I always hope whenever I see Doc, every once in a while he'll be at Citi Field and they'll talk to him for a few minutes. I always hope to see that he's doing a little bit better or something, and obviously that it was sort of inevitable that that couldn't last. And really like 1990 was kind of the breaking point. But I wanted to talk about a couple years before that, so 2 years removed from the World Series, you then experience actual just crushing heartbreak in 1988, which is the loss to essentially the loss to Oral Hershiser. I don't want to demean everybody in the lineup, but
no, it was pretty much him.
Yeah,
it was pretty much him.
Yeah, and that's I was telling you before we started, I moved to Los Angeles 18 years ago, and my in-laws are Dodger fans, but my wife was sort of indifferent. And then her sister went to NYU. So somehow I come into this family and I make them both Mets fans. I'm like, what did you do? I'm like, I just can't have it any other way.
They must really hate you now. I mean, that's
kind of.
I didn't actually spend that much time in the book on that playoff series. And you know, and I don't know why, except for, you know, the usual excuse when I didn't spend too much time on something, it's that it was 60 years, right? And I had to move fast through some things. One of them, you know, there are a lot of details that sort of flick at it in the book, and you addressed one of them, which is that, and I think part of this may be one of the reasons why I didn't devote a huge chunk of the book to that defeat, which is Oral Hershiser was pretty much the one and only. I mean, it was literally Oral Hershiser, almost just, you know, with a little tiny bit of help from Mike Scioscia and a little help from Kirk Gibson. It's like Oral Hershiser just, you know, in the way you've learned now, a single pitcher in a playoff situation can just sort of run the table on you, right, like that. And he really did it to us that year. But I also think part of that 88 series, in retrospect, we had lost that series before we took the field in one of those. It's you know, it's sometimes we throw around ideas like that in very arty sort of literary storytelling ways, but I think in this particular case it was really true. I mean, if you look at Dwight Gooden giving up that home run to Mike Scioscia, and we're knowing everything that we know about Dwight Gooden in this moment, right? You know, Gary Carter has been asked about that moment and whether he thinks Dwight Gooden was high on the mound, and he doesn't say no, and he doesn't say yes.
Right.
He said I don't know. And you know, when you think about it in those terms, what we were all witnessing is this sort of shocking, you know, well, no, actually, you know, Darryl Strawberry was unraveling and Dwight Gooden may have been literally high on cocaine on the mound. Like, it's, you know, Bobby Ojeda had already snipped off the top of his finger. We had already traded away Kevin Mitchell. Like, it's, you know, Keith and Gary were gone. Or basically gone. It's what 86 foretold what happened in 88. All of the things that blew that 88 team apart had already been baked in. And then Oral Hershiser just kind of finished us off on the grill, you know? Yeah. It was just incredible. God. Yeah. Also, by the way, I missed Game 7 because I was at like a middle school trip. Very, very. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. One of the
things I think you didn't mention in the book is Johan Santana's no hitter, which the St. Louis Post-Dispatch was kind enough to put an asterisk after the words no hitter. I was on a plane when that happened. Yeah. So I did not I had no idea in real time. This wasn't one of those planes where you could watch ESPN or anything on it. And actually telling me that it happened is somebody who's in the chat. My friend John, he said his first taste of sports heartbreak was that 1988 series. And that's John's
I guess
my best friend.
For me too.
He was the best man at my wedding, and it's largely his fault that I'm a Mets fan. So thank you for nothing, John, but I appreciate you being in here. He also has the disadvantage of his parents moved from New York to Japan in October of 1986. So, you know, getting to, you know, not really even enjoy the World Series. I know we've got limited time, but hopefully we get to talk again somewhere in the near future. But one of the things I loved about the book was how much stuff I just had no idea about. And I've read a fair amount about the Mets in books and magazines and watched whatever. I am shocked at how little I was aware of the team's original majority owner, Joan Whitney Payson, as in the Whitney Museum. So that family. Yes. Talk a little bit about her. Fascinating character, and why you think history doesn't spend that much time talking about her.
I'm so glad you asked. She is she's one of my own favorite sort of, I don't want to say discoveries, because I'd heard her name. I think a lot of Mets fans of a certain age had heard her name. We know who she is vaguely, that she was the first owner of the Mets, but that's probably about it. All I knew is Mrs. Payson, by the way, and I didn't know the Joan Whitney part. And, you know, diving into a book about the Mets history, this was not a story that I expected to find as rich as it became. She's, She is the first woman in American professional sports history to launch a franchise and to own one outright rather than inherit it. Two women owned pro sports franchises before Mrs. Payson, but they inherited them from husbands, fathers, whatever. This was her team. She made it happen. She was the driving force behind it. It exists because of her. Casey Stengel was hired by her. It is called the Mets because of her. And in many ways, the spirit of the team we all love, that we identify with as Mets fans, exists only because she had the genius, humility, wisdom, whatever you want to call it, to understand that the New York Mets in 1962, with the expansion draft talent pool that they've been given, had no chance to be a good team. Not just in 1962, but probably for several years. And that because of that, they had to be fun. They had to have good spirit around them. Losing would get corrosive otherwise. It's one of the reasons why she hired Casey Stengel. It's one of the reasons why they brought back so many Dodgers and Giants stars, aging though they were. But it's also sort of why they built the let's have fun spirit that sort of echoes with the team Roger Angel fell in love with from the very beginning, that I think so many comedians have found draw them to the Mets rather than the Yankees when they have that coin flip choice to make. But of course, for a team like the Mets, when you have a history like Mrs. Payson that you should be extraordinarily proud of and screaming from the rooftops about, what else do you do but bury it, right? Because that's the Mets. And, some of this is sexism, right? Some of it is Fred Wilpon buys the team from her family and, male owners, male sports. No one really cares that it's a woman. It's not that they don't care. It's that they don't really care either way, that what's special about it doesn't strike them as anything worth celebrating. So that's part of it. But I think the bigger part of it, ironically, is almost more silly and petty, which is that, as everyone knows, Fred Wilpon is a huge Brooklyn Dodgers fan. In fact, we have all been given the sense over the many years that he would rather own the Brooklyn Dodgers than the New York Mets, and that he built Citi Field as effectively a shrine to Ebbets Field, right down to naming it Jackie Robinson Rotunda at the entrance.
Right.
In other words, the Mets come from the lineage of two departed teams, the Brooklyn Dodgers and the New York Giants. But Fred Wilpon only cares about one of those teams, the Brooklyn Dodgers. Mrs. Payson owned 1% of the New York Giants, and her favorite baseball player was Willie Mays. Her love for baseball began with the New York Giants, and it was her broken heart at the Giants moving to San Francisco that sort of lit the flame that resulted in the Mets existing as a franchise. It's also the reason, by the way, that Willie Mays ended up on the Mets like a decade later. She was determined to get Willie Mays on her team. It took her a decade. She got him. But because she was a Giants fan, because the Giants are part of her lineage, the Giants part of Mets history kind of got buried with her. And I think this actually sort of, I'm curious to see if you agree, but I feel like Mets fans feel the Dodgers lineage very strongly, and the Giants lineage, or the Dodgers lineage, very strongly, and the Giants lineage is very faint to us. Is that true to you?
Yeah, no, I think that's accurate. My grandparents on my mom's side were Brooklyn Dodgers fans, and so they basically didn't follow baseball for 4 years. And in addition to my friend, my grandmother would always watch the Mets on WOR. I would spend a week or two in the summer there, and so the Mets were always on when they were on Channel 9 for free, because there was no paying for cable in that house until my grandfather heard about the History Channel. That changed everything. But anyway, that's neither there. Yeah. But
I didn't have Sports Channel or whatever it was called back then.
It's Sports Channel. Yeah, exactly. It was that you had to pay extra for that. I mean, it's crazy to think about. You had to pay extra for that channel. You had to pay extra for MTV. But anyway, so yeah, and I think I'm sure that you could find some, but it seems like the majority of people who end up rooting for the Mets, there is some fandom somewhere in their family. Maybe it goes back an extra generation to the Brooklyn Dodgers. And I don't know anybody that was, like their grandparents were New York Giants fans. Maybe it's all regional, but yeah. And I think that that is the part that really lives on. And you nailed it in the book. And I think we all knew the first time we went into Citi Field, it was like, this place is beautiful, but why is it a memorial to a team that it lives 3,000 miles away?
Yeah. And he had to put in the Hall of Fame to assuage Mets fans who were so annoyed about it. And that Hall of Fame, by the way, is one of the only two places in Citi Field where Mrs. Payson's name even appears. I mean, she's got a plaque in the Hall of Fame. That's good. At least they did that for her. That seems kind of the bare minimum, given that she literally founded the franchise and named it. And there's an entrance somewhere. I can't remember if it's down the left field line, or how there's like the Hodges entrance and the Stengel entrance, et cetera, et cetera. She's got one of them, but hers is like a door. It's not like an entrance or a gate. She has like a door. Right. And, like the book isn't meant to be an activist kind of thing, but I do wish that maybe Steve Cohen would fix this a little bit. Like, this is something that it would be so easy and obvious and great for the Mets to be proud of and to tell the story about. And especially given, some of the uglier headlines that the Mets have been in the news for over the last offseason, this seems like something really remarkable about our franchise that nobody knows and we should be celebrating.
No, I definitely agree. And I would hope that, it casts more attention on her. One of the things that I definitely wanted to talk about that I also didn't know about was from the low point when I believe that the team was largely being run by Mrs. Payson's nieces. And it was Mr. Met being replaced by of course, everybody knows about Metal the Mule. I had never seen the words Metal the Mule appear in anything. And I think you mentioned Jeff Pearlman's book about the Bad Guys one. He talks a lot about the 70s in there. And I don't remember Metal the Mule showing up in that. Talk about how Metal the Mule is such a very Mets thing, but yet even so, it's still forgotten about.
Oh, Metal the Mule. Metal the Mule is one of the, no joke, is one of the cornerstone foundational reasons that I wanted to write the book. It was, when I'm sort of sketching out chapters to sort of think through whether this sort of theory of how I could tell a history of a franchise through colorful losing could work. The story of Metal the Mule was sort of instrumental. Like, when I was explaining it to people, it was one of the key stories that I would use to sort of test out whether I thought the idea had resonance, because it's just such a hilarious story that, Mr. Met is one of the great mascots in sports. I mean, we don't have a lot of great things, but Mr. Met is great. Everyone loves Mr. Met. And Mrs. Payson's, it was actually her granddaughters, Bebe and Whitney, who in 1979, they were trying to shake things up and the team was terrible and they wanted to bring in new fans. And for some reason, they thought it would be a good idea to fire Mr. Met and replace him with a new mascot, right? Just marketing, shift things up, try something new. And so they fired Mr. Met and replaced him with a mule named Metal, Mettle, with the idea being the mule would sort of symbolize grit, determination, a lack of substance over style. And so in order to do that, and for what the animal that they decided to personify this was a broken down, effectively like garden slave that can't reproduce, right? Like, that's an animal with no future, literally an animal with no future. And the mule lasted not very long, because the other thing that they discovered when you hire a mule is that, unlike Mr. Met basically works not 9 to 5, but Mr. Met works like 4 to 11, I guess.
Yeah.
Right. And then Mr. Met goes home, and you can fire Mr. Met. Mr. Met has to feed, house himself. Mules poop in center field and require 24/7 care and feeding. And so it actually turned out that Metal the Mule was more expensive than Mr. Met. And that was the end of Metal the Mule. But this struck me as a very specifically Metsy way to lose, to flop, to define lose however you want to define it. It doesn't necessarily have to mean wins and losses on the field. It's more about a state of mind or a state of existence, which is things going wrong things going the opposite of what you planned. And to me, there was also a metaphor between Metal the Mule in those years and the franchise itself, right? That the Mets in that moment were sort of being treated like Metal the Mule, like this broken down thing that was just getting the bare minimum of care, was being put out to pasture. Its owners didn't really want it. And eventually they came to their senses and they got rid of the mule.
And the team was leaving shit out on the field every night.
It was just like, to me, first of all, it's just a funny story on its surface because they fired Mr. Met and replaced him with the mule. That's just funny. But when you start to dig into sort of the layers of it, it's not like I'm trying to be this snooty Mr. Literary guy too, right? Because basically we're talking about cow poop, right? Or mule poop. You do sort of walk into the metaphor like the Mets walking into cow poop, right? That's just sort of how it goes with the Mets, And so that, it's like a chapter like that in the book. Of course, the 62 Mets, even, Mrs. Payson, to me, is a story of the Mets losing, right? That's the Mets losing. We are blowing something. That's a Metsy thing to do. But sort of on the more serious side, there are stories like Mackie Sasser, someone like Mets fans all know. That's not a very funny story of losing. That's a very sad story of losing, but it's a story of losing in a very specific and uniquely Metsy way.
Yeah, and I think the book does a great job sort of bringing us up to date on Mackie. I wasn't even aware, of his coaching career and the fact that he finally seems to have gotten to the root of what the problem was.
Yeah.
And it sounds like he's happy, which is not where I think I saw that story going when I started the chapter. The book is So Many Ways to Lose, the amazing true story of the New York Mets, the best worst team in sports. And I really plowed through this book. That makes it sound like it was a struggle. No, it was in the way of like I couldn't really stop. And I made the mistake of staying up until 1:30 last night reading about the 2006 Mets. I could not sleep for about an hour afterwards because it was because that's just where I was in the book. And I'm like, oh, maybe I'll finish it. And I'm like, all right, I got it. Yeah.
No.
Just all those moments. But, there's some great stuff in there, like that you talk to Andy Chavez and just sort of reminding me that he should have been in the outfield in 2011 for the Texas Rangers,
right?
But he wasn't. Ron Washington made the same mistake that
he pulled a McNamara. He pulled the John McNamara.
Same thing as John McNamara. And
John McNamara, yes.
Yeah, and there's so much great stuff like that I do hope we get to talk again in the future. There's one last thing I'll talk about is in the book you talk about how all these teams have these crowning achievements of this great home run, that great home run. I was at Citi Field for some of the home runs in the 2015 World Series, but to me the most significant aren't postseason playoff home runs. One of them, it transcends baseball. I was there on September 22nd, 2001, when Mike Piazza hits a home run off Steve Karsay. The only time I've cried in public as an adult is that moment. It was so very cathartic. And then the flip side is something really fun. The first baseball game I ever took my son to was in May of 2016 in San Diego.
No way.
Yeah. And we sat with the 7 line. And Bartolo Colon hit a home run. And I honestly thought, I don't think I can ever take him to a game again because it will all be a letdown after this. Now, he was only like a year and a half, so he doesn't remember it. But it was
it's imprinted. It's imprinted. It's imprinted. Oh, I don't know if, I don't know if people watch this, but I don't know if people could see me covering my mouth as you're saying
some
that
people
because, it is, I was watching it live on TV, of course, which, is under the circumstances, not a sure thing, right? Like this was an early May game in San Diego and they were horrible. It's not like if this, if there's a game you're just going to miss, this would be a game you just miss. But I happened to be watching and my wife was in the room. And if this is an ordinary game, I'm not really paying close attention, but I see what happens. And I screamed. I full on screamed. Like I screamed. And, that is one of the happiest moments of my baseball life. Of all the plays in Mets history that I have rewatched the footage of the most, you would think it would be Ray Knight's or maybe the Andy Chavez catch, just because which I've watched as much as anything to dissect it. No, it's, even though it's only happened 5 years ago, it is far and away the Bartolo home run. Far and away, I've watched that probably 200 times.
Yeah.
I never get tired of it.
Yeah. And just for me being there and sitting in the section with the 7 line in San
My
Diego
God.
was better than being at the World Series just the season before. And, just random like 8-run comebacks against the Yankees at Shea Stadium. There's some great moments, but that one was just, that was just such a huge, everybody was just like, we can't believe what we just saw. You're not going to see something as crazy as that ever again.
Never see it. And that one of the reasons I actually, there's a chapter in the book about, it's a short chapter, but there is a chapter about Bartolo's home run, in part because, to me, it's a funny way of talking about losing, because I really do think in many ways that is our biggest, most celebrated home run in franchise history, which is crazy. That's crazy. It's one of the saddest things to even think and say aloud, but it makes me so proud. It's one of the reasons why I'm a Mets fan, is like, I can't think of any other team having one of their, having their biggest franchise home run be on a meaningless regular season game against a bottom feeding team in May. It's just, that's a very, very Metsy thing.
With a 40-something rotund pitcher hitting a home run.
Exactly. I mean, who we spent $20 million on.
Yeah.
He was 41 years old. It was like, he was nearly the guy who broke me for the Mets. When the Mets signed him, I was like, that's it. I can't take this anymore. And then within 5 pitches, I'm like, oh my God, I love this guy. He's amazing.
The thing that I'll leave you with for at least this part of our conversation is that in very Mets fan fashion, I mentioned that I moved to Los Angeles 18 years ago. My son started T-ball about a month ago, and we're in Los Angeles. And what do you think the names are of the teams? There's a Dodgers, there's a Cubs. Oddly enough, there's a Raptors. But my luck would be that my son ends up on the Yankees. So now my kid has a Yankees jersey. He's got a hat. It's not a Yankees hat. It's a B for Burbank where we live, but it's like his jersey sure says Yankees on it. I'm like, really? So none of the other teams? And it's like we signed up a little late. His best friend was on the Yankees. I'm like, all right, we're going to have to fix this next year. But I
don't know. I'm trying to think how I would have to handle that. Maybe this will give us something to reconnect on. I'm sure the Mets will give us are soon going to give us some kind of hilarious reason to reconnect.
Yeah, just as soon as they can play like 4 games on consecutive days.
I know, my gosh, I'm so excited that it looks like we'll actually get another game in tonight as scheduled. How crazy!
Yeah, I know. Well, Devin Gordon, as I mentioned in the book, So Many Ways to Lose: The Amazing True Story of the New York Mets, the best worst team in sports. Obviously, it's a fantastic book for Mets fans. But if you're curious and you don't understand why we are the way we are, you will definitely learn it in this book, and you'll also appreciate stories like Metal the Mule. Well, Devin, I appreciate you taking the time, and there's so much more I would love to get a chance to talk to you about somewhere down the road. But I appreciate you taking the time.
Well, glad to come back. We will. The Mets will not let us down for opportunities.
No, I don't think they will. Thanks so much.
All right. Take it easy.
You too.